You take it from like you have a $50 bid for a CPA for a start trial, and then you increase it to 70, then you think, oh, I'm going to get more volume. It's almost the opposite with a ROAS bid. If you take it from 50% ROAS and you bump it up to 70%, you're putting more strain on Google to try and find those users. And there's fewer users that are going to come in and be able to perform that way.
My name is Jacob Rushvin, CEO and founder of Botsy. Today on the Price Power Podcast, we're talking with Ashley Black. Ashley is a Google App Campaigns rock star. She was head of app ad sales at Google, where she shaped Google's go-to-market iOS roadmap and worked with thousands of apps. She is now the founder of Candid Consulting, where she's bringing all this knowledge to the world to deliver high-performing marketing strategies. I've worked together with Ashley on a client, so I've seen her expertise firsthand. Today, we're talking about how to optimize app campaigns for value-based bidding. Ever think, why am I just sending trial starts as conversion events when those aren't real revenue? Ashley teaches us about another option called Target ROAS campaigns, as well as other interesting stuff from the Google app world. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of Google app campaigns, this podcast is for you. Okay, so when we're running different types of campaigns with Google, we've got different app campaigns, and for our subscription app, if we're going from an app campaign to a Target ROAS, Target Return on Ad Spend campaign, what are common mistakes you see when apps are switching from these campaigns?
I would say the most common mistake I see from people, just to clarify, you have 3 different campaign types that you can run for if you're promoting your app. So you have just pure install campaigns, so like a CPI campaign. You have CPA campaigns, those are cost per actions. This is if you're like bidding toward a start trial or a sign up or a registration, right? There's a specific action that somebody's taking, and then you're setting a bid for that conversion event. And then there's tROAS campaigns, which is telling Google, hey, we want to see, X percentage of our ad spend back within this certain amount of time. So I would say the majority of people, the majority of non-gaming apps are still spending on the TCPA range. TCPI is sort of like just for pure volume. And if you're, I don't see it as often in this subscription space. So let's put it that way. But I think the big challenge that I see in people trying to make that shift over is, one, they are setting their ROAS bid way too high. Like, of course you want 100% return on ad spend by like day one. Like, yeah, that would be great. But the likelihood of the algorithm being able to find users at scale with a bid that aggressive is just like, it's not going to happen. So I see people just coming in it with way too high of expectations, thinking that it's some sort of like miracle product, and that's not what it's going to be. And then the other thing that I see people doing is having really long conversion windows, and having a really long conversion window. So saying like, I want my, let's just say 50% of my ad spend back within, let's call it like 30 days, 90 days. That's just too long of a window for Google to really be able to optimize effectively. And so I usually say, hey, start with a shorter window, 7 days, for example, and then decrease your ROAS target. So like, yeah, maybe you want 150% back by day 90. That's fine. That's probably fair. But you're going to need to sort of like do the back end math to figure out, okay, well, what what sort of ROAS do we want at day 7 that's going to get us that day 90, 150% return, if that makes sense.
Got it. Yeah. So less, we have these, high ROAS targets, but more aligning kind of the ROAS at the point of the conversion event so Google can effectively optimize. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you think like this value-based bidding is like, should all subscription apps just adopt this today? Is it a good fit for all apps? Is there a certain level of scale you need? Like, what are signals that you should be thinking about this type of bidding?
So it's not for everybody. I think we've talked about this a little bit, or in the article that I think will sort of follow with this goes into detail about it, which is if you are risk averse, probably not for you. Like there's a steep learning window. I would say, 2 weeks at a bare minimum, usually a little bit longer. So that's one. If you don't financially feel comfortable losing some money to figure this out, then I probably wouldn't recommend it for you right out the gate. The other thing that you need to have is just like a high enough volume of conversion events coming through. So if you're only generating, let's use start trials as an example. If you're only generating like 5 start trials per day, that's just not enough data for Google to really be able to say, okay, well then from that start trial, how many of these are going to convert? Let's say it's only like 50%, so 2 to 3, users. And it's just not enough data. So if you have limited volume, then again, it's probably not a good fit for you.
And so it sounds like
Yeah.
the volume thresholds might even be higher than a normal campaign where, maybe you need maybe 5 or 10 conversion events is enough, but because we actually need the revenue values coming in.
Right.
And so it's even lower. Like normally our campaigns are optimized off trial start, but we actually need the trial conversion data to get the real revenue data to pass back to Google. So it's
That's
even
right.
lower. So you even need higher volumes than normally.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I think Google's recommendation is for post install events to be generating about 10 per day. And so let's say that's 10 start trials. I would prefer it to be much higher than that, but that's sort of their guideline. So 10 start trials per day. But if only, like we said, 50% of those trials are converting into actual paid subscriptions, then you're probably going to need at a minimum 20 start trials so that we're getting the system's getting enough data back on those revenue conversions to be able to make optimizations and say, okay, this was the right pocket of inventory for us to go after, or the type of user that we need to go after, just more signal. So low volume, this probably isn't a great fit.
Gotcha. So, and I don't know if this makes sense, but if you have a higher priced app or higher priced subscription, is that better, or does that not really matter as long as it's more the quantity of revenue events versus like the amount of revenue?
Yeah, I would say I'm trying to think through a little bit. Like, I think you want to have just more volume of those transactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the higher ones, obviously, like if you're running $130, subscription, there's only so many people that can afford that too, or want to pay for something like that. And so already your pool of users is, dwindled as opposed to like something that's $6.99 a month, right? Now you've opened it up to a lot more households that can, afford your product.
Got it. So just thinking about this. So normal campaigns, we recommend like 10 events, 10 conversion events per day. We still want those same 10 conversion events, but now they just need to
Yeah.
be revenue events. So we think of them as trial conversion or other type of in-app purchases that we can send back to Google. Okay. And
Yes.
then
Yes.
like if we recommend sending those events back as soon as possible. And let's say, okay, I have a 7-day trial, that makes sense. But what if I have a 30-day trial? Is this campaign just not a good fit for me?
Probably not. And that's kind of where I go into like the how risk averse are you, because what we're talking about is like Google has no idea. It could spend, let's just say it's spending $1,000 a day. And after it has spent, let's give your 30-day trial example, after it spent $30,000, it doesn't get its first signal that like a purchase actually occurred. Right. So like that's your call if you want to spend that much money without knowing, without the system knowing, hey, how are these users ultimately going to convert for us? And so, yeah, again, if you have a really long trial window, probably not the best product for you.
Got it. Okay. So
Yeah.
let's say, um, So we probably want to be at least a medium-sized advertiser, have figured out
Mm-hmm.
probably performance marketing a little bit. We understand what our conversion rates look like. We're comfortable and have a decent-sized budget. We can pass back conversion events or revenue events the necessary time. So let's figure out how do we actually you mentioned kind of having a ROAS target below what you actually want to achieve.
Right.
I think I remember seeing in your article that maybe like a good guideline is starting 20% below your target ROAS. Is that right? And
Yeah,
like,
sometimes you got to go lower.
okay,
um, so you kind of have to figure out, I mean, you'll figure this out pretty quickly. You're going to put a target in. And so when you're in Google Ads, you're going to select the conversion event that you want to optimize for, which for most subscription apps, that's going to be, it's a Firebase app. By the way, you have to be doing this on Firebase in order to use the tROAS product. But you're going to put in the App Store subscription convert event. That's what they get directly back from Play. And by the way, we're mostly talking about Android here. They do have an iOS offering. We can get into that later. But so that's directly back from Play on when that trial ultimately becomes a paying user. And again, in Google Ads, you set up the conversion window for that event. So you can go in and set it to 7 days or 30 or 90. The recommendation here would be, 7 or less, if you can. And so now I'm forgetting where we were going with this one.
yeah, just how do you figure out that ROAS target? Like you say, you start
Oh, right,
20%
right, right.
below. Is
So
that yeah?
exactly. So once you put in the actual event, then you're going to have to put in your ROAS bid. And this is, I always tell people, it's like the reverse of a CPA bid, right? So like with your CPA bid, you go high and you would expect more volume, right? You take it from like you have a $50 bid for a CPA for a start trial, and then you increase it to 70, then you think, oh, I'm going to get more volume. It's almost the opposite with a ROAS bid. If you take it from 50% ROAS and you bump it up to 70%, you're putting more strain on Google to try and find those users. And there's fewer users that are going to come in and, be able to perform that way. And so you'll see your scale decrease the higher your ROAS target, right? You drop it down to, let's say, 30%. Now the system's like, oh, well, we're not held to as high of a standard to bring in these users. We can go out and try and find more of them. And then how do you even come up with that ROAS target? I mean, that's on each individual team. You guys got to figure out what ultimately makes you money and how long you're willing to wait to get back full returns or how quickly you want them back, et cetera. But Google's recommendation is, yeah, if you want a 50% ROAS by day 7, then you should actually go in 20% lower. So starting at 40%. In my experience, I've had to, in some cases, go even lower to even get volume. And then once I do get volume, try and scale it back up again to the true target. But again, that's just a function of how aggressive your target is from the start.
And I imagine like how big your budget is as well, or if you have a larger budget and get yeah, okay. And so what's that like ramp up period time? Is that like a month? Is that a week? How would I think about that?
Again, like I'll give you 2 examples. I
Okay.
have one client who I've been running this with, and their 7 day ROAS target was like 17, 18%. It took us no time at all to get going. Like the campaign was starting to spend pretty quickly. What's interesting is on that client, we actually ran a CPA campaign and a tROAS campaign side by side. We did a geo-split test on that. So like to make things simple, it wasn't like this easy, but like 25 states, US states in the CPA campaign, the other 25 states in the ROAS campaign. The CPA campaign definitely spent a lot more versus the tROAS campaign, but the performance was pretty good on the tROAS campaign. We didn't run the test for that long. But The 17% target we got going right away. Okay. Switch it over to another client. Their target was 65% by day 7. Much, much more aggressive, right? Like a lot higher. It took us 6 weeks of me just being like,
Oh, wow.
drop it a little bit here, drop it here, like, keep going, keep going, keep going, add in more assets until we finally figured out, okay, now we have it at scale. Once we did scale it, what was frustrating is ultimately the bid at that point was like 30%. And so it did not perform very well until we were able to kind of like slowly and gradually build it up again, which again is why I'm saying for those that are risk averse, like it can be tricky.
Yeah, yeah, got it. But if it works out, you can see better performance. Where there's a reason
Yeah.
we're not just doing this to inflict pain on ourselves. We're doing it because actually we
Right.
can see a better performance in the long run.
It does tend to perform better. And what I find, truthfully, is like somebody who like sets these campaigns up and optimizes them. I just find it so much easier but also more accurate to be able to optimize the campaign for the true end goal. I always found it really challenging. I mean, even though I still do it, it is challenging to be like, okay, this is what our CPA target is, but then you're having to look at this like other metric after and say, okay, well, like, yeah, we hit a $20 CPA on a start trial, that was our target, but how did the ROAS perform after? And so it was sort of like sometimes could be misleading. Whereas with the tROAS campaign, I think you have a bit more direction as to like what the future is going to hold longer term.
Got it. Yeah, because you can be bidding on trial starts, but all of a sudden, if your conversion rate drops, you could still be spending the same, but all of a sudden you're not getting the same returns, and so that like greater
Exactly.
level of feedback is going back to Google, where can more effectively optimize and find the right audiences for you. That makes sense. So start.
Yep.
It sounds like advice is start with a lower target and work your way up. That's probably a better route. From you mentioned doing that geo test. It's not. Can you run both campaign bid strategies in parallel, or is that not like recommended?
Can. Again, Google's going to tell you, no, that's not the best way to go about it. And there's always the conversation about like cannibalization of like, if you have two campaigns that are targeting the same audience and potentially getting at the same inventory, are you hurting yourself by like competing in the same auction? I always find that that's like really hard to prove. So yeah, generally they recommend some sort of test to prove it out. But I think the challenge with ROAS campaigns, and I think anybody will say this, gaming, non-gaming subscriptions, is the scale aspect. And so, you know, it can be kind of a challenge to be like, we're going to go all in on tROAS because you are going to see the overall volume in most cases decline. Like, yeah, the revenue might be, I shouldn't say the revenue might be higher, but like the profitability might be better, but overall maybe revenue decreases. So that's sort of something I think case by case you'll have to figure out of like what's the best strategy for us if we run them, we just run them at the same time simultaneously, or if you are able to generate enough volume to just do ROAS.
Interesting. Got it. Got it. That makes sense. And so maybe if there's a case where, we have decent scale as an advertiser, but we're struggling with getting kind of the conversion metrics or kind of return on ad spend we want from a CPA based bidding strategy, that we might want to try kind of the tROAS to help control costs. So maybe not right for everybody. And you might need a decent volume, but and harder to scale, but probably more profitable.
Yeah, I would say generally once you
Yeah.
get it to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Interesting. Interesting. And so, thinking about the different bid types, we're not going to reach different placements based on the different bid types, right? It's still all the same eligible placements, no matter the bid type.
I think eligible is the key word there. Like
Okay.
technically, all placement types are available. And just so everybody's clear, there's sort of like five placement types when we're talking about Android. So you have the Play Store, which is a huge one. Like that's why Google performs so well on Android, in my opinion. I mean, there's, it's kind of like having Apple search ads, right? Um, you have the Play Store, you have google.com. So that's just straight up search. You have AdMob inventory, you have YouTube inventory, and then you also have, I guess it depends on every advertiser, but you have mobile display inventory. They call it MGDN. So this is like display ads that serve in a web or a mobile browser, I should say. So those are your three primary sources of traffic with Google. But you may see on ROAS versus your CPA campaign, you getting into like maybe you have way more search traffic on your ROAS campaign than you do on your CPA campaign. You may be also something I pay attention to is like, what's the CPM? I tend to find that the CPM is a lot higher on ROAS campaigns than on CPA campaigns. Again, we're talking usually with the CPM going up, you're talking about higher quality traffic.
And I think that's a good thing to think about, where we don't really just want the cheapest install, right? We don't want, oh, our CPM is going down, we're getting cheap installs. And then I hear this a lot, right? Where people maybe come to you and say, my install, CPI is so low, but no one is converting in my app.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, you're getting crap users, right? The quality of your traffic is poor, and you actually don't want the lowest CPM possible. And so I think it's a good reminder.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, that's just another metric to pay attention to, I think. And so to your question earlier is like, oh, or your assumption maybe, the inventory is the same. Yes, theoretically, the inventory is the same, but you may notice that your serving distribution across that inventory is different. And by the way, obviously um, I worked at Google for a long time. And so I talk about all the different placements that you see within the Google's front end. What advertisers see is search, display, and YouTube, and then search partners, which by the way, I don't see that much traffic going to search partners. I never have. But within search, that includes play search. So people like searching for an app in the Play Store, but it also includes searches on google.com. And display includes AdMob inventory, so your ads serving in other apps, and it includes your ads serving on a mobile browser. And then there's a variety of YouTube placements, right? You have shorts, you have in-stream, you can serve on the homepage. So it's not as I know you think you're getting some information there, but it could be cut so much more granularly.
And so you can't target by those different placements, but can you see the end placements in a performance report, or do you not even have insight into that after running a campaign?
Not to the same degree. Google's going to lump it. So they'll do, if you pulled a placement report, what it will show is Google owned and operated, which includes all play traffic and all YouTube traffic and all search traffic. Okay. So all of that traffic is just lumped into one line item. And then basically what you can see is, and only impressions, which is really annoying. You can't see cost, you can't see the number of conversions, but you can see impression level information at the, if an ad serves in another app or on another site. So not Google owned.
Got it. Yeah. And we can probably a whole nother conversation on why they do that. Well, I mean, there's a pretty straightforward answer why they do that, but we don't have to get into that as much as well. It's more favorable for Google, but
yes,
that's okay. So what when we think about targeting, is there any targeting we do?
Not a whole lot, to be honest. You can add in other layers. You can also add in other exclusions, which I think people overlook a lot of times, especially newer advertisers. I think make assumptions about, oh, well, of course, why would you show an ad to somebody who already has my app? you have to tell Google that you don't want your ads to serve to people who already have your app. So there's exclusion lists that you can apply to it. For example, like if you don't want ads to show to people who have made a purchase in like the last, I don't know, 365 days or something like that, you create that audience and then you upload it for your campaign. You can remove, like if you don't want to serve on your brand terms, that's another, like, again, more exclusions than inclusions, right? So like you can say, don't serve my ad on my brand terms. You can say exclude these specific sites. Usually people don't do that until they see that there was, like, they saw a drop in quality or something like that, and then they could see that there was a lot of impression serving on in a certain app or site, and then they go in and add it. But a lot more exclusions than creating audiences that you think would be a fit. You can tell Google like some signals, like, hey, target people who are interested in education, for example. But it's not going to do that exclusively. Again, it's just like a signal that it's passing back to the campaign.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
it used to be, maybe I'm making this up, can you actually add keyword exclusions directly in the dashboard yourself, or do you have to get like an account manager to do that for you? I remember there was somewhere you had to like request it and you couldn't actually do it manually.
Yeah. Now I think that you can do it directly in the
Okay.
UI.
For your
So it kind of sits in a, yeah, it sits in a sort of a weird place. It's like buried in like an admin section. It's not just like a standard setting in your campaign. But it now exists sort of like in the front end to advertisers.
do you think that's the biggest starting point for exclusions, of just excluding brand keywords, where that's an easy place to cannibalize, or just
Right.
have a false impression of your performance?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. You have to be careful. I did it for one customer who didn't have it, and they just saw a complete, it was like a 60% decline in their installs. And they sort of had to make the call of like, well, do we want that?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, yeah, it certainly resonates that like we're paying for people who maybe would have installed organically, but actually at the same time, they didn't see their organics increase by 60%. It was a much more modest increase. And so they sort of had to make the call to keep it on. But I would say most people sort of are want to limit the amount of brand exposure they get because, it's taking away from their organics.
Yep, that makes sense, and
Yeah.
that kind of gets into the world of incrementality, and
Yeah.
there's lots of potential ways to try to measure the incrementality of branded keywords, and same with like going back to App Store search and App Store ads and Apple search ads, of bidding on your branded keywords. Is it making a difference? Okay, is it okay, you're getting a X% incremental lift. Is that worth the cost? And so there's not really a right answer, right? It varies by product.
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha. And any other exclusion rules that you go, hey, let's just start with these, or you kind of default to?
It's primarily the users who already have your app. So that's sort of the biggest one that I just feel like, yeah, it's kind of frustrating that like it's not done automatically. And then the other one, to each his own, you have to figure out what's best for you, is people who, if you want to exclude people who have are reinstalling too. Like if you see value in paying for those users, or if you don't, and again, like that's something that you would need to tell Google, like, do not target users who are now coming back and, they uninstalled and now they're reinstalling. So like I said, some people see value in those users and paying for them. But I think a lot of people are like, would they have just done this on their own?
Right. And that's all
Yeah.
possible on Android specifically, where on iOS you wouldn't have that same level of insight. Is that right?
Yeah.
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 So maybe, yeah, maybe
Exactly.
talk about that a little bit. Like, should I is this a strategy that makes sense for iOS campaigns? How do you think about Android app campaigns versus iOS app campaigns generally?
Oh man, that's like such a big, meaty topic. I spent a lot of time, and I have talked about it a little bit sort of on my own platform, but, um, not talking about the ROAS campaign type, just let's sort of leave that out. That's relatively new for Google to have a ROAS campaign type on iOS. Um, Google already has some limitations, which I'll get into on iOS. So I know that they're pushing it a little bit, but for me right now, I sort of am waiting to hear more about like how it's performing. I don't necessarily want to be one of the guinea pigs because they had a lot of improvements to do on their like earlier products, even on their CPI and CPA campaigns on iOS. So as I mentioned, like the big advantage that Google has on Android is that it has the Play Store and that it owns Android and it gets a significant amount of data. So, um, if you are running, let's just put it this way, like if you have an Android app and you're not running it with Google, like you're doing yourself a disservice. I would say that. So you should do that. If you have an iOS app and you're not running with Google, I get it. Like the product has not performed all that well. And that's because of a variety of reasons. I think one of the big ones that people don't realize is that, you know, a lot of Google's inventory still on iOS still comes from web. And so, like if you think about it, just like google.com. And so there's a little bit of like a disconnect in being able to do tracking there, the web to app stuff. But also another huge factor is that the only place where Google prompts for ATT is YouTube. And they only started doing that like a year ago, maybe even less. Like I didn't actually see the prompt until I think December of last year. So they weren't getting IDFAs for a very long time. This is all to say they're making a lot of improvements. From what I hear, there's supposed to be some substantial improvements to their to the product itself, the iOS product itself. And I think mostly this is just that they're going to start using IP addresses to inform their models, and that should be coming in next quarter. So like hopefully October, November time. So I'm really excited to test it out for a few. I have a few like clients who are going to start with me in October to start testing out their iOS Google campaigns. But up until this point, I've had to turn it off for more of my clients because the performance just wasn't there.
Gotcha. And yeah, so Google was late to adopt scan, and still what all conversions are like modeled, right? They're based on kind of the limited data they do have, and so now I guess on YouTube, maybe that's worth trying again for some people now that there might be better conversion tracking there. But yeah, so it sounds like probably tROAS doesn't make sense on iOS, and then quite yet, but maybe you try out general Google app campaigns and see how it
Yeah.
performs. But is it probably a later term strategy or kind of a scaling strategy versus starting with that on iOS?
Well, again, I think I hate using the term "it depends." But I mean, what I do observe most of the time is that people are, running pretty heavily with Meta for iOS, and obviously they have Apple ads too. And then they're like, "Hey, are we missing out on an audience on Google?" And then that's when they come over. And I think that's fair in some respect, just based on my experience running the campaigns and seeing people run the iOS campaigns for a long time. I think that's fair. So, but I do think that if you feel like you're reaching a point of saturation on Meta, yes, like Google technically does have the largest network on iOS. Like YouTube is still like first or second most downloaded app on iOS devices. And so you can't really overlook it. But you might have to be sort of patient with it. And I will say on iOS, you do have to have a pretty strong creative strategy because most of the time, again, from my experience, you get a lot of traffic flowing through YouTube, YouTube Shorts in particular. So want to make sure that you have those creatives like really dialed in if you are going to launch with Google and iOS.
Got it. And that's like good videos essentially, right? You
Yeah.
have to, yeah. And so if you don't
Yeah.
have the production capabilities to kind of create those videos or confident in the ability to do that, that's probably a starting point. And to be honest, it's so much easier than it used to be to create amazing video
Right.
content now. So maybe it's less of a barrier than it used to be.
Yeah. And we're talking mostly like UGC stuff tends to work really well there. So again, like it's mostly shorts inventory, and so you can think about that as sort of like Reels or the TikTok comparison. And so those sort of like authentic user type videos I've seen perform pretty well on YouTube.
Got it. So maybe if you're running those on another channel and those work well for you, it could be a signal
Mm-hmm.
that it could make sense to try.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Something else I saw you writing about recently was that if you're not getting good enough signal with maybe just trial conversion events, that
Yeah.
maybe you should look deeper at retention events to further optimize those campaigns and getting those stronger signals. I thought that was like made so much sense, and I think I work a lot in kind of the retention monetization world. So, I do similar kind of analyses and correlation analysis to see like, what early engagement events correlate with long-term conversion retention. And so, when is that, or I guess talk me through like how you think about doing that and then when that's a good strategy for apps.
I think honestly, you should be thinking about it all the time. I think too often people are like sort of have this mindset on like, okay, well, what's that one event that we're going to track and measure? And you have to kind of think about it a little bit more dynamically. And so, the example that you're referencing or what I had talked about is like I had one client who was optimizing for just registration complete. So they just wanted to see who was going through their whole registration flow. And if they completed that whole flow, then like that's what they wanted to optimize for. But ultimately, like those users weren't sticking around for that long. Like the retention on those users wasn't great. And retention was a big play for them because for this particular app, they really cared about monthly active users. That was sort of their main KPI that they were looking at. So we did a bunch of analysis to try and find, well, what was another event that was happening with a great frequency, right? Because like that's one thing. Like, yeah, sure, everybody would love to optimize for like something super deep funnel, but then you can't optimize based off of 5 users. So like we need something that has volume. And for them, they're a messaging app. What we ended up finding is that, oh, actually, it's not so much the registration complete, but if they actually start a conversation with somebody, so they start messaging somebody, that is when we see the stickiness, the retention improve a lot. And again, at volume, right? There were other things that showed greater stickiness, but like the number of users was too low, so we couldn't use those. So that's how we ultimately ended up deciding to pivot for them and say, we're going to shift away from just this registration complete, filling out a bunch of, questionnaire questions, and move toward them actually starting to take some action in the app. And so I think if you can think through, what are those early additional actions that a user takes. I think, you and I are familiar with one particular app, right, that we've talked about and worked on. And one thing that we're looking at is like, okay, what if we stop just optimizing for a start trial and instead like the action that they take immediately after? So did they watch, like, let's call it the tutorial? Did they complete the tutorial after the start trial? Or did they, I don't want to give it away, but like, did they do something else immediately following, something that probably happens within like the next 5 minutes after starting the trial? And is there enough volume in that for us to be able to then optimize for that action instead of just start trial? So, it's going to vary depending on your app and like how it functions, but thinking beyond just, what is sort of required of the user.
Yeah, this reminds me of like activation analysis to figure out, general, like what is our activation moment in the app when we're trying to figure out what leads to long-term retention. And so, I do that by, we're trying to figure out the right path for a user. What is this activation moment that we can kind of guide users to through product changes or growth changes or experiments? And it sounds, pretty similar to kind of that process of looking at a number of events and trying to figure out what correlates with long-term retention or conversion. And so is that generally how you'd recommend someone trying to go find this event? Just looking at kind of the
Yeah.
correlation between a bunch of events and seeing what has potential for like a predictive value.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, you have a team or you're capable of doing it yourself to be able to understand. And I think honestly, a lot of times it's probably a little bit obvious if there's like a clear flow, right? Like let's use the messaging app. It's like, okay, if they started a conversation, it means that they had somebody else to talk to on the app. And so that right there shows that there's like more stickiness, right? Like they're joining or they're on the app so that they can communicate with somebody else, as opposed to, let's just say, like watching a video in it. Like that's not as meaningful probably to you because that's not the intent of the app. They're not in that particular app, they're not like serving ads in videos or anything. And so there's not as much value in a user like that. So I don't know. To me, I think that it kind of stands out a little bit, but yeah, you got to do some of the analytics to figure it out. In this case, like it did take us a while to sort of like understand, there were so many other events that, like I said, showed high retention, but we needed something that happened within 24 hours, really, really quick, so that we could still send that signal back to Google in a short period of time. And like I said, there was still a high volume of users so that we were getting enough volume.
Yeah. So in reality,
Yeah.
you may think, oh, what event do I choose? There's so many, but in reality, the actual set of events that happen that quickly, and you probably have some intuition already around what
Yeah.
is, if you haven't done the analysis, maybe there's probably only a few that could fall in that category, and then maybe just do some basic correlation analysis to see which one is potentially more predictive. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And is that like, that's probably not something that strategy is probably not something you lean on immediately. You may go to that strategy if you don't see performance through optimizing towards a trial
Right.
or the normal events.
Right. I think, in the examples that we used, the other one that I'll call out, it's not as, relevant maybe for this audience because it's an ad funded app, but they had previously been just optimizing for installs. They were like, just whatever, like cheap installs, that's what we're looking for. And we had to pivot a little bit and we're like, well, if people are sticking around, like they're not uninstalling the app after day one, like if they're still a user by day one, one, it's still high volume because we're just going after, they're like utility apps. So it's like basically anybody. And, we can afford to pay a little bit more for these users and be more competitive in the auction if we're optimizing for users who we think are going to stick around for longer. So ultimately with that advertiser, we totally shifted and now everything bids on like a day one retention event. So yeah, I think you can start out with just like your start trial if that's what you want to do. But if you're like, these users like aren't, they're not doing exactly what I want them to do. We're seeing a big drop off or, a lot of people are canceling. Then I think you have to start to look at some additional parameters that you might want to add on.
That's interesting, where it's a bit counterintuitive where you're actually, you're able to bid more on this event and so potentially reach larger scale by going further down funnel because that event is more predictive of long-term value.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so I want to end on this question. This has been awesome so far, and so you mentioned the past having hot takes you weren't able to share when you were working at Google. Any contrarian views about Google Ads or app campaigns that maybe most marketers or mobile marketers get wrong, or you just have to get off your chest?
Yeah, I don't want to, I still have, I'm not trying to burn any bridges. Let's put it that way. They were a very good employer to me for almost a decade. So I'll have to be a little bit reserved in some sense. But I think when you talk about the like advertisers and sort of the way that I see them approaching things, like Google certainly positions this product and a lot of its products, by the way, keep in mind, like UAC was the first machine learning ads product. Now they've got demand gen and PMax, right? And like you're seeing all of these other Google products start to move into the same realm as UAC. But I see people being like, well, it's automated. Like, why isn't it doing this? Like, if it knows that it's not hitting my CPA, then why is it still spending my money? It's like, Google's still a business. Like, I always joke, please, I hope nobody takes me seriously here because I don't know if this is the case, but I'm like, if you looked at the algorithm like lineup, it would be like, hey, Google first, get customers good performance, and then like all of these other things. So like Google, I think, still looks out for number one. And so it's all to say that you still have to do work on these campaigns. Yes, they're automated, but like you can't trust that the system's going to always be doing, exactly what you think it should be doing. It still requires you to go in, make optimizations, make some tweaks. And so please don't overlook that just because it is an automated product. And yeah, I'll leave it there. That I'll leave my, I'll sort of table the rest of my hot takes maybe until I have a glass of wine.
Okay, yeah. We'll get you on another podcast after the glass of wine.
There we go.
But
There we
yeah, and
go.
I think that's a good warning for like all ad networks do that. You have to realize, yes, they are a business. They're out to make money. It's this dual goal of maximizing performance for you and balancing performance for them. And so I think that's, going back to what we said earlier, some of the fine-tuned controls have been removed where sometimes performance can be hidden in blended
Yeah.
placements and blended networks. And so, yeah, don't stay diligent when running your campaigns.
Yeah. And there are things that you can do. Like I think a lot of people are like, well, there's only so much, right? Like, and people tend to think of it as like targeting. I hear a lot of people comparing Google to Meta and the Meta just having so many more parameters in which they allow you to make tweaks to the campaigns. Those, yes, it doesn't exist to the same degree in app campaigns with Google, but there are things that you can do. And so like, yeah, don't assume that there's nothing there to, left to tinker with. There are things that you can do. And if you're not sure, then like follow along for more stuff from me and maybe, what working with Jacob too. Hope to give some more tips.
Yep. If you're struggling, reach out to Ashley. Yeah, do you want to do a quick shout out of your consulting business and anything else you want people to check
Sure.
out?
Yeah, so my company is Candid Consulting, mostly work as an app agency, specifically supporting clients on their Google strategy, and then do general consulting for apps in their space, and so yeah, sort of all encompassing, but obviously with a lot of expertise on the Google side.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we'll link out the blog post on tROAS campaigns and the podcast notes. And if you ever have any questions on Google Ads, just Google Ashley Black, Google Ads for my subscription app, and there's so many research out there from you and blog posts and other content. And then if you're still stuck, reach out, go find Ashley and
Yes, please.
get in touch. Cool. Well, this was
Sounds
awesome. I
good.
really appreciate you joining us. So many great insights.
Yes, great to be here. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.